Get out!
Revenge Files with Nora. File 14. Erica. The moment I saw my name removed from the presentation slides, I understood a fundamental truth about corporate survival. Someone had meticulously erased all traces of my contributions to a framework I had spent 2 years building. They presented it to our biggest client as if it were their own creation. I watched as they accepted the applause, handshakes, and promotions that should have been mine. But there was something they didn't know. I had documented every step of the framework's development, every draft, every email. Every late-night revision was recorded with immutable metadata. They thought they had stolen my work. What they actually did was provide me with the evidence I needed to end their careers. Here's what happened. My name is Erica Fletcher, and 7 years ago, I joined Hartwell Strategic Partners as a junior analyst, fresh out of NYU, and saddled with student debt that would motivate me for decades. The company was floating like a cloud on the 27th floor of a glass tower in Tribeca. I remember being very impressed the first time I saw the building. The lobby alone was the kind of building that probably cost more than my annual rent. Hartwell specialized in organizational transformation for Fortune 500 companies, helping large corporations restructure everything from their supply chains to their corporate cultures. It was exactly the kind of place I wanted to build my career: prestigious, demanding, intellectually challenging. The office was designed to impress clients: floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River, conference rooms named after famous management theorists, a coffee bar with a barista who remembered everyone's order. It felt like the kind of place where important work was done, careers were built, and your ideas could truly change how big companies operated. I was 24 years old and completely captivated by the environment. I was a naive idealist who fully believed that hard work and good ideas were enough to achieve success. My apartment was a small studio in Astoria, Queens, about 45 minutes away by subway when the trains were running smoothly. Every winter night, I shared a bathroom with a radiator that made a noise as if someone were trapped inside. But since I wouldn't be spending much time in my apartment, I didn't really care. For me, life was outside. Every morning, I would put on my best work clothes and head to work, feeling as though I were going somewhere important. Every Sunday, I would call my mother in Ohio and excitedly tell her about the projects I was working on and the clients she would hear about in the news. She didn't fully understand what organizational transformation consulting meant, but she understood the pride. Sometimes, when I see a young businesswoman on the street with the same excitement, I remember that feeling with a sigh. By my 3rd year, I had earned the title of lead strategy analyst, which sounded impressive until you realized it mostly meant I was the person who stayed latest, worked weekends, and produced the actual deliverables while others took credit in client meetings. I didn't mind, not really. I was learning. I was building expertise. I was watching how senior consultants operated, studying their presentation styles, and I was developing something that would eventually change everything about my career. It all started with a pattern I constantly noticed in our customer relationships. One after another, companies were grappling with the same fundamental problem. They could identify what needed to change, but they couldn't sustain the transformation. Have you noticed this too? Initiatives would start with great excitement and executive support, showing early results that made everyone optimistic. But within 18 months, they would slowly revert to old patterns. This intrigued me. Eventually, I began documenting these failures and looking for commonalities. After everyone went home, I worked late into the night analyzing case studies, gathering data from past projects, and building statistical models in my own time. I remember one night in particular, around 11:30 p.m., sitting alone at my desk with takeout boxes and spreadsheets. The cleaning crew had come and gone twice. With the city lights reflecting through the windows, I was working with intense concentration. I was comparing transformation failure rates across different industries when a pattern finally emerged. The problem wasn't the strategy. It wasn't the implementation either. The problem was that organizations treated transformation as an event rather than a continuous process. They declared victory too early, dismantled their support structures, and acted surprised when old behaviors resurfaced. What emerged from that insight was a framework I called the Adaptive Transformation Model. Unlike existing change management approaches that treated transformation as a linear process with a defined endpoint, my framework recognized that organizations needed to continuously adapt. It incorporated feedback loops that detected regression early, identified warning indicators before problems became visible to leadership, and provided intervention protocols at each stage of the transformation lifecycle. I spent 2 years refining it, testing individual components with small client pilots whenever I could justify it, documenting everything in a private repository. It gradually turned into a personal project I never anticipated from the beginning, but one that deepened the more I got into it. I was meticulous about documentation. Every draft went into a folder with the creation date in the file name. Every revision got a version number and a changelog note. I sent myself emails summarizing key developments, creating a time-stamped record that lived on company servers with immutable metadata. I backed up everything to a personal cloud drive, syncing automatically every time I saved any file. I even kept a physical notebook with dated entries tracking my thinking process. It was a pink flowered notebook that would come up many times later. Call it paranoia. Call it the instincts of someone who had watched too many colleagues lose credit for their ideas to louder, more senior voices. Whatever it was, this habit would become the most important decision of my professional career. In the end, the person trying to steal everything I had built was Derek Stanton. He joined Hartwell as a senior consultant about 2 years into my tenure. Derek was a man who wore his confidence like an Italian suit. His self-assurance came from never having been challenged. You know the type. I have to give him credit, it worked for him. He was welcomed with great fanfare as a transformation expert hired from a rival firm. He would mention the names of his former clients at every opportunity, talk about his Harvard MBA within the first 5 minutes of any conversation, and had an extraordinary talent for positioning himself close to successful projects just before their completion to share in the praise. Derek was tall, good-looking in a polished way, with prematurely gray hair at the temples that gave him an air of distinguished experience. He laughed easily at partners' jokes, remembered everyone's names, and had a way of making whoever he was talking to feel like the most important person in the room. He was extremely good at the political aspects of consulting that I had always found exhausting and slightly dishonest. His office was 3 doors down from mine, and I could hear his confident laugh through the walls at least twice a day. Our executive director, Malcolm Webb, adored Derek from the moment they met. Malcolm was old-school corporate politics personified, more interested in relationships and appearances than actual methodology or client outcomes. He played golf with clients on weekends, attended the right charity events, and evaluated employees primarily on their ability to make him look good. Derek understood Malcolm's priorities instinctively. Within 6 months, Derek had become Malcolm's clear favorite, invited to client dinners and strategy sessions that analysts like me never knew existed until after the fact. I should have recognized the danger signs earlier. Derek started showing unusual interest in my work around the time I began presenting early components of the Adaptive Transformation Model to our internal strategy team. These were informal sessions, meant to get feedback and refine my thinking before proposing the framework for formal adoption. Derek attended every presentation, sitting in the back row, taking detailed notes. Afterward, he would approach me with thoughtful questions, requesting copies of my materials for his own education, offering to help me refine certain sections with his senior consultant perspective. I was flattered. Genuinely, embarrassingly flattered. Here was a senior consultant, someone Malcolm clearly valued, taking an interest in my work, offering mentorship and guidance. I shared freely, explaining my methodology in detail, walking him through the research that supported each component, sending him draft after draft as I refined my thinking. I thought I was building an ally, perhaps even a sponsor who could help me get the framework adopted at a firm-wide level. I was building something else entirely. Derek had a way of making his requests feel collaborative rather than extractive. He would send emails late at night, casual messages that made it seem like we were colleagues working together toward a shared goal. One message read, "Great insights in today's presentation. Would love to dig deeper into the regression indicators section. Could you send me that module when you have a chance? Want to understand your thinking better so I can support you when this goes to leadership." I sent him everything: the regression indicators, the intervention protocols, the feedback loop architecture. Piece by piece, I handed him the components of a framework that had taken me 2 years to develop. Each time, I felt grateful for his interest, pleased that someone with his credentials found my work valuable enough to study closely. The first concrete warning came during a team meeting in October, about 18 months after I had started developing the framework. I was presenting an updated version to our internal strategy group, walking through refinements to the feedback mechanisms, when Derek interrupted with a suggestion. He proposed a modification to the timing of intervention protocols. The suggestion itself was fine, but something about how he phrased it bothered me deeply. He spoke about the framework with familiarity, with a sense of ownership, as if the underlying concepts were as much his as mine. He used possessive language, our approach, the direction we are taking this, the framework we have been developing together. I felt a chill in my chest. We hadn't developed anything together. I was the one working alone until late at night with takeout boxes, arriving in the morning with bloodshot eyes from exhaustion. He was taking my materials, reviewing my work, absorbing my intellectual contributions. But he hadn't contributed a single original idea. The questions were always about understanding what I had created, not about creating something new together. After the meeting, I returned to my desk with a strange feeling in my stomach. I opened my documentation files and started reviewing every email I had exchanged with Derek over the past year, every draft I had shared with him. A pattern emerged that made my stomach clench with recognition. Derek had been asking for specific files, always framed as educational interest, but the requests followed a systematic logic. He was building his own complete copy of my framework, piece by piece, version by version, and he had been doing it for almost a year. And while all of this was happening, I had gotten too caught up in my work to see any of it. I was furious with myself for being so naive, and of course, with Derek, who had meticulously planned all of this. I decided to be more careful about what I shared going forward. I gave Derek older versions of documents when he asked, files that were missing key components I had developed recently. I stopped discussing my latest refinements in team meetings, but I also realized that Derek already had enough. The core of my framework, the fundamental innovation that made it valuable, was already in his possession. The question was what he intended to do with all of it. The answer came 3 months later, at our annual client showcase. Hartwell hosted this event every January, bringing together representatives from our top 30 accounts for a day of presentations, networking, and thought leadership. It was the firm's biggest visibility opportunity, a chance to demonstrate our capabilities and generate interest in new service lines. Presenting at the showcase was a career milestone, something analysts dreamed about and senior consultants competed for with ruthless intensity. 2 weeks before the event, Malcolm called a mandatory meeting to announce the showcase agenda. The conference room was packed with people trying to catch glimpses of the schedule, hoping to see their names on the presenter list. Malcolm walked through the day's structure with obvious enjoyment, building anticipation, and in our anchor methodology slot, Malcolm announced, "We will be featuring Derek Stanton presenting something truly innovative, a framework called the Adaptive Change Architecture, which represents a breakthrough approach to sustainable organizational transformation." My framework. My 2 years of research and development, repackaged with a slightly different name and Derek Stanton's name on every slide. I wasn't surprised he had taken things this far, because I had already understood his intentions for some time. I sat in that conference room, listening to Malcolm praise Derek's innovative thinking, watching colleagues nod appreciatively at the preview slides that looked almost identical to my presentations, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was the crystalline clarity of understanding exactly what had happened and exactly what I needed to do. Derek had been careful. He had waited until he had enough material to present as a complete methodology. He had rewritten my language slightly, reorganized my sections, made just enough surface alterations to create plausible deniability. But underneath was my intellectual contribution, my months of research, my original files with metadata that told the true story. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my studio apartment in Astoria, listening to the radiator clang, staring at the ceiling. Part of me wanted to believe there had been some mistake, that Derek would acknowledge my contribution when he realized the overlap. But I knew better. The systematic way he had collected my materials, the careful timing of his announcement, the complete absence of any credit or acknowledgement, all of it pointed to deliberate theft. Denial was pointless. All of this was happening, and it was completely planned. After the meeting, I returned to my desk and began systematically building my case. I created a comparison document, placing Derek's presentation materials side by side with my original drafts, highlighting the structural similarities. I compiled my complete email trail, showing the progression from my earliest sketches to the refined framework, with timestamps that proved everything. I pulled the metadata from every file, demonstrating that my versions predated Derek's by months or years in some cases. I created a comprehensive timeline showing exactly when Derek had requested specific materials from me and when similar concepts appeared in his documents, often within days of receiving my drafts. The evidence was overwhelming. What I didn't have was a strategy for using it effectively. Going directly to Malcolm would be useless. He was too invested in Derek's success, too likely to dismiss my concerns as jealousy. Going to HR risked being labeled a troublemaker. I needed something more powerful, more structurally impossible to ignore. I found my answer in a clause buried in Hartwell's intellectual property policy. Like most consulting firms, Hartwell claimed ownership of work products created by employees. But the policy also required accurate attribution for internal purposes, specifically to ensure proper credit in performance evaluations and promotion decisions. Intentional misattribution was technically a violation of company policy, something that could be reported to the ethics committee. More importantly, I discovered that 2 of our showcase clients had specific contractual provisions about methodology provenance. They were government contractors, required to verify that any frameworks they adopted weren't misappropriated intellectual property. If Derek presented my work as his own, and those clients later discovered the true authorship, Hartwell could face serious contractual and reputational consequences. I began building relationships with people who would matter when the truth came out. For example, Patricia Chen, our customer relations director, was responsible for managing the accounts of government contractors. Patricia was the type who was meticulous about compliance and read contracts from cover to cover. She placed a lot of importance on accountability. While drinking coffee in the break room, I told her I had some concerns about attributing the methodology in the upcoming presentation. From the moment I started my sentence, she became serious and her face tensed up. She asked, setting down her cup, "What kind of concerns?" I said carefully, "I'm not ready to make a formal statement yet, but I've been developing some of the concepts that will be presented, and I want to make sure the attribution is handled correctly, especially given the government contractor requirements." Patricia nodded slowly. "You're right to be thinking about that. Those contracts are very specific about provenance. If there's any question about who developed what, I'd want to know before the showcase rather than after." There was also Raymond Ortiz, a senior partner who had been at Hartwell for 20 years and served on the ethics committee. Raymond had mentored me briefly when I first joined, and he had always encouraged me to document my work carefully. He was the one who had told me, during my first month at the firm, that ideas without evidence are just opinions. I asked if I could meet with him to discuss a professional development question. During our conversation, I asked hypothetically about the firm's process for resolving attribution disputes. Raymond said, leaning back in his chair, "The key is evidence. The committee can't adjudicate he-said-she-said disputes, but if someone has clear documentation showing the development timeline, showing who created what and when, that changes everything." Timestamps don't lie. I created a formal evidence package in Airtable, organizing my documentation into a database with timestamps, source links, and status tags. I labeled every file, annotated every email, built a searchable timeline that walked through the development and theft. I saved multiple copies in different locations, ensuring that even if someone tried to destroy the evidence, it would survive. The showcase was scheduled for Thursday. On Tuesday, I requested a meeting with Derek. I told him I wanted to discuss collaboration opportunities, that I admired his work on the adaptive change architecture. Derek agreed immediately, clearly pleased by what he interpreted as capitulation. We met in a small conference room. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished table. Derek had brought copies of his presentation, ready to accept my praise. I closed the door behind us and placed my evidence folder on the table. I said, keeping my voice neutral, "Derek, before the showcase, I think we should discuss something important." I opened the folder and removed the comparison document. I watched his face as he realized what he was looking at. His expression shifted from confidence to confusion to something that looked almost like fear, though he recovered quickly. He said with a small laugh, "Erica, I'm not sure what you're implying here. If there are similarities between our work, it's probably because we've been collaborating on these ideas for months. You've been very generous sharing your research." I pulled out the metadata printouts. I said, "These are the creation dates for my original files. This one is from 19 months ago. This one from 16 months ago. Your first document on this topic was created 8 months ago, 3 days after I sent you the draft you claimed you wanted to review." Derek's jaw tightened. He looked at the papers, then at me. His charm was still there, but something harder had emerged underneath it. He said, his voice dropping, "Look, I don't know what you think you're going to accomplish here. Malcolm has already approved my presentation. The clients are expecting it. Even if you had a legitimate complaint, which you don't, do you really think anyone is going to side with a mid-level analyst over a senior consultant? Over Malcolm's personal recommendation?" His tone and his gaze revealed his true face even more powerfully than his words. I no longer had a single doubt. I said, "I'm a lead strategy analyst with several years of documented contributions to this firm. You're right that nobody might believe my word against yours, but they might believe the file timestamps. They might believe the email server logs. They might believe the version history showing my concepts appearing in my documents months before they appear in yours." Derek leaned back, reassessing. "What do you want, Erica?" I said, "I want proper attribution. My name on that presentation as co-developer of the framework. A statement acknowledging my contribution read aloud at the showcase. And a written commitment that any future use of this methodology will include appropriate credit." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're dreaming. Do you have any idea what that would do to my reputation? How it would look to admit that I collaborated with an analyst?" I gathered my documents and stood. "Then I suppose we have nothing more to discuss. I'll be presenting my evidence to the Ethics Committee tomorrow morning. I've also prepared a summary for Patricia Chen regarding the methodology provenance requirements in our government contracts." The color drained from Derek's face. He said, but it came out uncertain, almost a question. "You wouldn't," I replied. "I would. I've worked too hard and documented too thoroughly to watch someone else take credit for my intellectual contribution. You have until end of business today to decide how you want this to go." I walked out of that conference room with my heart pounding, but my hands steady. I had given Derek a choice. What I didn't anticipate was Derek's third option. By 4 that afternoon, Derek had gone to Malcolm with his own version of events. He told Malcolm that I was attempting to extort credit for his work, that I had been pestering him for months to include my name on his projects, that I was threatening to sabotage the showcase if he didn't comply. He presented me as a jealous analyst who couldn't accept that her contributions were merely supportive. Malcolm called me into his office at 4:30. His expression was cold, disappointed in the way that managers get when they've decided someone is a problem. He simply informed me that Derek had raised serious concerns about my behavior, that he was placing me on administrative leave pending an HR review, and that I would not be attending the showcase. I said, Malcolm, before you finalize that decision, I think you should know that I've already submitted a formal complaint to the Ethics Committee regarding methodology attribution. The complaint includes extensive documentation with file timestamps and email trails. I've also flagged potential compliance concerns to Patricia Chen regarding our government contractor accounts. Malcolm's expression flickered. He was a political animal, skilled at reading situations. He recognized that this wasn't going to be a simple matter of taking Derek's word over mine. I continued. I have copies of everything. If this proceeds as a he said, she said dispute, the evidence will speak clearly. But I want to offer an alternative. Let the Ethics Committee review the documentation before the showcase. If they determine that Derek's attribution is appropriate, I'll accept their decision without further complaint. If they determine otherwise, the presentation should be modified to reflect accurate authorship. Malcolm sat with that for a long moment. I could see him calculating risks, considering how this might look if it escalated, worrying about the government contractor liability. He said finally, I'll need to see this evidence. I'll have a copy on your desk in 15 minutes. The Ethics Committee meeting happened the next morning, Wednesday, less than 30 hours before the showcase. Raymond Ortiz chaired the session, with representatives from HR, legal, and client relations. Patricia Chen sat at the far end of the table, a stack of contract documents in front of her. Derek attended with Malcolm's visible support. I attended with nothing but my evidence folder and years of documented work. The review took approximately 3 hours. I showed the committee my development timeline and demonstrated how the concepts appeared in my documents months before they appeared in Derek's documents. I showed them email trails and material requests that systematically extracted components of my framework. I showed them the metadata and version histories, which are undeniable digital records of the theft. They patiently watched me, almost like watching a magician, without fully understanding everything I said. At one point, I projected Derek's presentation slide side by side with my original draft from 14 months earlier for a comparative view, hocus pocus. The language was almost identical. The structure was the same, only the title had changed. Derek attempted to argue collaboration. He claimed that the ideas had emerged from discussions, that attribution was always fluid in consulting work, that I was exaggerating my individual contribution. Raymond asked, can you show us any documentation of these discussions? Any emails where you contributed ideas that appear in the final framework? Derek hesitated. We talked in person mostly, over coffee, in the hallway, so you have no written record of your contributions. The committee deliberated for an hour. It was probably the longest and most tense hour of my life. When they returned, Raymond delivered the verdict. The documentation clearly establishes that the methodology was developed primarily by Erica Fletcher. Mr. Stanton's presentation materials contain substantial elements that originated in Ms. Fletcher's work product without appropriate attribution. This represents a violation of Hartwell's intellectual property policy regarding internal attribution requirements. Derek's face went pale, then red with suppressed anger. He didn't fail to shoot me a sideways glare. Malcolm looked like he was calculating the damage to his own position. The committee recommends that the showcase presentation be modified to reflect accurate authorship. They further recommend that Mr. Stanton receive a formal warning regarding attribution practices, and that Ms. Fletcher be recognized for her intellectual contribution through appropriate channels, including consideration for senior consultant promotion. The presentation took place the next day. I was standing next to Derek in front of the room. I watched him introduce our joint methodology with a fake smile that didn't reach his eyes. He kept his speech short and acknowledged my basic research before getting to the content. I presented the second half, explaining the protocols I had developed. Representatives of state contractors asked detailed questions about the source of the methodology, and I answered with complete transparency about the development process. Afterward, several clients approached me directly to discuss the framework. They wanted to understand the research behind it, the evidence base for its recommendations. They treated me as the expert I had proven myself to be. One client, a VP from the largest government contractor account, pulled me aside after the presentation. She said, "I appreciate the clarity about attribution. We've had issues with vendors before who couldn't document their methodology origins. Your transparency about the development process actually increases our confidence in the framework." Derek resigned 3 weeks later. The formal warning, combined with the public attribution correction, had damaged his reputation beyond recovery at Hartwell. He gave the expected excuses about new opportunities, but everyone knew the real story. His departure created an opening, and Malcolm, now motivated to demonstrate his commitment to proper attribution, recommended me for the promotion. 6 months after the showcase, I was named Senior Strategy Consultant, the youngest person to hold that title at Hartwell. The adaptive transformation model became one of the firm's flagship methodologies, presented with my name prominently featured. Today, I'm a partner at Hartwell Strategic Partners, leading our transformation practice. The framework I developed has been implemented at 37 Fortune 500 companies. I've published 2 papers on sustainable organizational change, and I speak at industry conferences about methodology development and intellectual property protection. Derek landed at a smaller firm in Boston. I still keep that pink flowered notebook in my office. Sometimes new analysts ask me about it, and I smile and tell them the story. I say, "Document everything. Timestamps don't lie. Your ideas have value, but only if you can prove they belong to you." If there are 4 things I learned by regaining recognition for my work, they are as follows. First, document everything from the moment an idea is conceived. Timestamps, version histories, email trails, these become your evidence when words fall short. Second, understand your organization's policies and keep up with updates. The intellectual property clause that saved me was hidden in an employee handbook I read years ago. Know what protections exist and how to use them. Third, build relationships when you need them. Patricia Chen and Raymond Ortiz became crucial allies because I had established trust with them long before the crisis. Fourth, be prepared to escalate the situation. Derek trusted that I didn't want to cause a stir. My desire to go to the ethics committee, initiate the compliance process, and create results ultimately led to a solution. If you have had a similar experience, I would love to hear your thoughts. But of course, what I earned was not given freely. I had to prove my authorship with evidence that could not be dismissed by someone with a higher status and more persuasive words, evidence that was indisputable and could not be rewritten. It was not an easy process. However, once proven, it became permanent. My intellectual contribution lives on in the company's records, customer relations, and a methodology that continues to transform organizations. Derek tried to take credit for my years of work. He had the position, the connections, and the political savvy to legitimize his theft, but I had something more valuable than all his advantages combined. Evidence. Do you agree? Share your thoughts in the comments. The full pink file playlist's waiting, or discover other color files for more office revenge. See you in the next file.